Welcome to the Online Success Journey Podcast, your opportunity to discover and learn from entrepreneurs like yourself. This is not your typical podcast, but a place where you can get the real story and find out how real people encounter speed bumps and detours, but journey through to find success. Now here's your host for the Online Success Journey Podcast, Patience.
Hello everyone and welcome to Online Success Journey. This is episode 108. Are you ready to join the clan? Today we have Dave Sanderson, the managing partner of Dave Sanderson Speaks Enterprises, and his recently released book titled Moments Matter. His programs are not only inspirational but share actionable strategies that you can use today. Hello, Dave.
Hello, Patience.
Thank you for coming. I know the clan is anxious to hear your story, so let's get started with the basics. Can you tell my clan a little bit about your background, about what you did before you started your own business?
So I, out of university, I was, began in sales. And for 30 plus years, I was in sales, starting with selling copiers door to door to ending up with a company by the name of Oracle, which I was in technology sales and traveled heavily. So I for 30 plus years, I was in sales and impacting people and sales management and working with people and traveling all around the world, helping them with their solutions.
Okay. Why do you do what you do?
Well, it wasn't my game plan, Patience. I was on a sales trip to New York City, and I was just happened to be on that plane that crashed into the Hudson River, known as the Miracle on the Hudson, U.S. Airways Flight 1549. And I became the last passenger off the plane that day. And I thought I was going to go back to work, which I did for a short term. But I realized that if I could go out and I could speak and impact people's lives and help them understand that they can overcome pretty much anything on how to use different strategies that I and other people use that day. So that's how I began what I'm doing right now. And it wasn't by plan. It was because I just happened to be on that plane that crashed in the Hudson River and became the last passenger off. And now, there's a movie that was made about it that I was very honored to be involved with called Sully, and being able to share the message around the world and write books and impact people's lives.
Tell us the story, a little bit the story. How did you keep the inner strength, and what helped you to go through all that whole deal?
Well, I didn't realize how serious it was until the captain said his famous words, "This is your captain, brace for impact." And that's when I realized it was serious. So I prayed immediately, and I prayed for three things. I prayed that the captain would get me down back to one piece. So I prayed that my last client who I spoke with would call my wife to tell her that I loved her. And the third thing is I prayed to God to forgive my sins. I didn't want anything between me and God at that point. We're going down, and I wanted to go up, and it wasn't looking good for me. And then I put my head down because I candidly did not think I was coming back. I thought that was the 60 seconds from that point. I'd probably be in heaven with my mother, and it would be over, and hopefully my wife would do what I asked her to do. But as you know the story, fortunately, we had a captain who skillfully glided that plane into the river, got us all alive, but then we had to get out of the plane, and water was rushing in very quickly. And, by the time I stood up, water was already about waist level to me. It was 36-degree water. So it was cold water rushing into the plane. And my game plan, Patience, was just get to the aisle and get up and get out. But when I got to the aisle, I heard my mother, who was in heaven, say something in my head that she said to me when I was just a child. And it was, if you do the right thing, God will take care of you. And the right thing for me was you help other people first. And I went to the back of the plane to see if anybody needed help. And once we got everybody out, I started making my way out of the plane. And and when I got to the door, it was an amazing sight because there was no room on the wing of the boat for me. So that's why I was on the plane waist deep in 36-degree water for about 7 minutes.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. What a story. So how did you overcome all the trauma and the syndrome? What happened?
Well, I attribute a lot of it to, and they call it state management, but it's how you manage your mind. And I learned that by being the head of security and traveling with a gentleman named Anthony Robbins for over 10 years. And I learned from him on how, when people get in a traumatic or a very challenging situation, how if you manage your mind, you can only survive it, but thrive and grow afterwards. So that's how I did it. And there's three ways to do that: is the way you move your body and your internal dialogue, the questions you ask yourself, and what you focus on. And I knew those strategies, and I employed them that day. And then after that day, day when I got back to my home and I had to go back to work. So where some other people went through some other challenges and PTSD, as we know that Captain Sullenberger had some depression after his situation based on the movie. I didn't. And so what happened at that point, patients, I kept asking myself, well, why didn't I? And I said, well, people kept telling me that I would need therapy and I'd have to go and I was going to have PTSD, but I didn't. I kept asking the question why, and I came up with the answer because you ask a question, you get an answer, and is I figured out how I could help people through a traumatic life event and grow from it instead of going to a depressed state. And that's how I did it.
Okay. If anyone is there who have passed through something like that, or maybe they have their relations who have passed away, what advice would you give them?
Well, I tell people in my audiences when I speak that everybody in that audience, including everybody who's listening now, will have what I call a personal plane crash in their life, which is a fire, a flood, a health scare, a loss of a relative. It could be anything, an automobile accident. It could be anything. Everybody's going to have something because no one gets through life scot-free. Something's going to happen. So what I tell them is there's really two ways to do that. Number one, like I just mentioned, is how to manage your mind and those strategies on how to do that. But the second thing is the meaning you attach to something produces the emotion of your life. And emotion is your life. Meaning equals emotion. Emotion equals your life. And I tell people that strategy on how you can actually change the meaning of something by using a technology or a technique called reframing. And I teach people how to reframe meaning so they can attach a positive meaning instead of a negative meaning.
Wow. Do you mind sharing the key strategies that you learned from the top leaders so we can hear what it is? Yes?
Yeah, I think some of the key strategies, like I mentioned, I've already mentioned state management and the way to reframe or the meaning. But the other one is, and I use this every day, and this helped me become a top producer in my business. It's helped me be a top producer in what I'm doing now and speaking and product and my online business, which is starting to grow right now because of I look at modeling people who have achieved what I want to achieve. And it's an easy strategy. So I didn't invent this, but I've employed it. And what I find in patients is most people know these things, but they just don't do them. They don't employ them. And I tell people, this model somebody who's achieved what you want to achieve. Go find out how they did it. And I learned that from my first mentor named Bill back in the late 1980s when he taught me that when I was just a young kid. And I thought I knew everything, and I found out I didn't know anything. And he taught me that lesson is find somebody and model somebody. And so I always reached out and used that strategy. So I tell the top people in the world, what they've done is they network and or they read a lot about people who have achieved something, and they start doing the things they've done. And that's how they get to where they are.
So are you telling us now, even if you have left school, no longer a student, that you need to start reading books in your own home and re-educating yourself?
Most definitely. I think you can't start early enough reading. And I've changed where I don't read a lot of books now. I listen to a lot of books, but I listen to a lot of podcasts. Because what you can learn on a podcast is from these leaders who do podcasts is find out their strategies very quickly and then be able to employ them. So now I've sort of shifted from reading a lot of books to listening to a lot of podcasts from leaders to understand one or two things so I can then quickly use that, employ that, and make a change and impact somebody's life.
But Dave, we are all created differently. We are engineered differently. But can anyone become an entrepreneur?
I think anybody can, and I think everybody could if they really put their mind to it. I never thought that I would be an entrepreneur. I was in sales. I worked for companies. I made a good income. But what really taught me that anybody could is when I was the head of security for a gentleman named Tony Robbins. I don't know if you've heard of Tony Robbins, but he would, every time I would pick him up at the airport or the helipad, he'd ask me this question. He'd say, "Are you still working for that company?" And I'd always give him an answer, yes, and I gave him an excuse. And he kept telling me, "You'll never be truly free in your life until you become an entrepreneur or start working for yourself. That's when you can have true freedom and control your destiny." And so after the plane crash, a couple years afterward, I was with him, and he and I had a conversation. I remember we were in Chicago, Illinois, and he sort of pushed me out of the nest and said, "It's time for you to do it. Go do it. Don't look back. Burn the bridges. Burn the boats, go for it and don't ever look back. And that's what I did. And so I think everybody can. Everybody's got, they can start anything. I mean, reading your story, you had a garden in the back. That was your first little business, right? If I understand what your background is, right? Selling eggplants, right?
Yes.
And I understand that's how you started. So everybody can do something. Especially online now, where my wife has a little online business right now, and she does it, and she makes a few dollars here, a few dollars there, but everybody can do it. It's just a matter of motivation and basically, like Tony told me and taught me, you burn the bridges, burn the boats. You're on the island, you don't look back, and you got to figure it out.
But how did you feel every time you went to pick Tony and he would ask you that, are you still working for that company? Did it ever bother you?
Yeah. One thing you realize is you can only have so many answers, and he filters through it pretty quickly, and he knows when you're not telling him the truth. And there comes a time when he sort of calls BS on you. It's like, okay, I know you're not telling me the truth, so when are you going to do it? And holding you. But see, one thing I've learned too, which has helped me tremendously when I became an entrepreneur, is you gotta raise and hold your standards. And he would always hold me to that standard. So when this happened, he was the only one that called me in the hospital that night. And he talked to me, and that's when he started giving me guidance and coaching on how to do it. And I still work for a company, but you can only tell yourself a lie so often until one day you're like, you know what, I'm tired of telling myself the lie. And if I keep telling it, I'm just going to be exactly where I am right now. I've got to tell myself the truth. And sometimes people don't want to hear the truth. And I was one of those people until I finally had that come to Jesus moment where I had to tell myself the truth. It's like, if I wanted to get where I need to be in my life, I've got to step back, start my own business. And yes, we took a financial hit. Everybody takes a financial hit. Like I mentioned, everybody who's listening on this interview, it will have a personal plane crash. So something's going to happen. But how do you respond? How do you step up in that moment? Just like we all stepped up on the plane that day and turned a crisis and a tragedy into a miracle within 6 minutes.
Okay. But because some people, they always have, yes, we have excuses, we have families. You're like, if you are beginning and you'll be like, okay, if I start a business, then I'll leave my job. How will I pay for this business? So what advice would you give to my client who are not quite there yet?
I wasn't there yet either. I quit cold turkey in February. It was February 1st of 2014 is when I quit cold turkey. I didn't have any income. I started with zero, but I started figuring things out, and I started doing things just to make $1 here, $1 there, just so I could survive. And then I started to build the network out and started doing these things. And one of the advantages we all have right now, patients, is we can do things online. Where if I did this 20, 30 years ago, when Tony started in 1984, when he started his, there was no internet, there was no online presence. He had to start from scratch, with nothing. And if you heard his background, he had 4 fathers. They kicked him out of the house. He was 17. He had to start at zero, but he started digging out. And what he did is pretty much the same thing I did. He found that mentor. His mentor's name's Jim Rohn, and he would just hang on Jim Rohn and learn everything he could from him, just like I did learning from Tony and Tom Hopkins and those people that I hung with. So when I started out with zero, I had faith, and I prayed every day, but I had faith and say, you know what, I will work it out. And when things are going to get tough, there will be times when we're not going to have enough money. We're not going to go on vacations like we used to. We're not going to have Christmases like we used to. But there's a sacrifice everybody needs to make to be able to get to that next level. And that's what I think I tell people. You got to burn the boats, because if you ever go back, you'll never go forward again.
How did your wife take it?
She was not happy at first. I did not do this until she gave me the go ahead. Because my wife lives in a state of certainty. That's her worldview. She has been brought up where she knows where it's coming from, and if she doesn't have any certainty, then she gets very upset. And I had to give her enough certainty that I could pull this off, where it took me 3.5, 4 years to figure that out. I'm not saying it would happen overnight. And then one day, it was January 16th. What was it? 3 years ago. So January 16th of 2014, she said, maybe it is time for you to do that. Go for it. And as soon as she said that, I burned the bridge. The next day, gave my 2-week notice, and started from scratch with nothing, and just had faith. She had her little job, and She was making some money, but I never counted. It's her money. I was a provider, and I had to figure it out. So I started networking voraciously and talking to people and start making some income here and there, so I could at least put food on the table. And then I started getting momentum, and that's when all of a sudden you start getting that momentum, and it starts rolling, and that's when you know that okay, it's going to work out, but we're still going to have tough times.
When you worked on your business for 3.5 to 4 years, did you ever at one point got discouraged and said, Dave, this is not going to work out. Maybe I should go back to my old job?
She has done that. In fact, we've had that conversation recently where we were used to making, I'm going to be very candid and open. We were used to making close to $300,000-$400,000 a year, and now we're making probably 25% of that. And she, so her lifestyle has changed. My lifestyle has changed. And we had that discussion. And I just told my assistant, Denise, I said, it'd be very easy for me to do that. I could go back to work right now and get a job and make the money and we have an easy living life. But I wouldn't be impacting the people I'm impacting right now. I wouldn't be living my mission. And what kind of model would I be for my kids to show them that I quit when I made a commitment and I quit? I don't want to show anybody, especially my family, that pattern of if you try something and quit, it's not you have to stick it out. You have to follow through, and you got to do everything you can to make it happen.
Okay. You mentioned Tony Robbins told you to raise the standards. When you talk about raising standards, I know I've even heard him talk about raising your standards. People would think, okay, raising my standards, maybe buying something new, buying something on the trend, or maybe going on a vacation, which is expensive. So can you please explain to us, what do you mean by raising your standards? Yeah,
people should not look at raising standards of material things. When I talk about raising standards, what Tony talks about raising standards is having that mindset where I'm not going to accept less. And I just wrote a blog last week about it and about how the difference between people who have an average life and are doing things all right, but they're not exceeding, is that 1% called grit, and being able just to focus and grit it out and be tough about it. So raising standards is not about material things. It's about the mindset of saying, I'm not going backwards. I've got to raise myself. I got to be better than I am playing right now, because, you can see people all day long, especially in sports and athletics, that you see somebody who gets second to Usain Bolt in the 100-meter dash, and you're like, that guy's the second fastest human on earth, and he's a loser. What happens if he quits? He can't quit. He's got to keep going. And recently, this last week, I just saw the race, and Usain Bolt got second place. So the guy, Justin, I think his last name, Justin, beat him because he just kept going and going because he raised his standard, saying he's the standard. I've got to be as good as that standard to compete. And so it's about looking who's the best and raising your standard to that level.
Okay, you mentioned that you have coaches and you have mentors. What is the most valuable thing your mentor has told you?
I've had a lot of mentors. I've learned a lot of things. My first mentor, his name's Bill. And I would say Bill probably had the most influence, even though he probably didn't teach me as much as my other mentors and coaches. But the one thing he taught me that really stuck with me, and I talk about this in every speech that I say and talk to, is I asked him, how does somebody become a leader? And he said, if you want to be anything in your group, put yourself around the peer group that you want to be like, and they will elevate your standard. That's where I got raising standards. So he taught me that lesson back in the late 80s, where if I put myself around people who I want to be like and who've achieved, they'll raise me to that standard. They'll hold me to that standard. And that's what I've always strived to do, is put myself around people who have succeeded so I can succeed and play at that level. And that was my secret back in the late 80s, and that's how I got to where I am today.
What keys, distinctions on how you can use a non-confrontational approach to improve your chances when confronted with circumstances that may present a challenging situation? Yeah,
and that's a great question, because when I was with Tony, I had a lot of confrontational situations. As being head of security, that happens. And now we're seeing it a lot in law enforcement now. And right now, law enforcement's typical first response when confronted, and people's, is just fire right back at them, right? Fire back at people. And what I have learned, and where I started learning my big lesson, is once I had to build rapport very quickly with people to gain trust and confidence, so I could then change and break their pattern of the confrontation. So I would do anything, and the best way to do that is ask them a question that's totally irrelevant, and they'll look at you like you're a crazy person, and it's like, and all of a sudden you've broken their pattern. And then that played out on the plane that day. I'll give you an example how that played out when I was confronted on the plane. So I was hanging out of the plane. There was a lady lady on the wing with a baby who was standing there and wasn't moving, and no one was moving around her to get off a sinking plane in the Hudson River. So I yelled at her. I yelled at her to throw the baby. And candidly, patience, I didn't think she was going to throw her baby. But I got her attention and I broke that pattern. She looked at me like I was a crazy person. But once I did that, I had her attention and I had a rapport built. And then somebody else got the baby and she got off the wing and people walked off the wing. So it was a perfect example for me is if you could break people's pattern in a confrontational situation, all of a sudden now you're in alignment, get in alignment with them. You can have a much better chance to build rapport and talk them out or talk them down or talk them away from that confrontation to a place where you can mutually get to a better place.
I've been worried. Okay, teach us one key on how to compress all the decades of work and experience into 1 day of our work.
So I think I've maybe referenced it a little earlier in a different way, but the strategy of modeling, and what modeling means is, if you see somebody, you want an outcome, you want to make $100,000 this year. Find somebody who's made $100,000 in a year, read up, listen to them, get around and whatever you can, and do exactly as they did, and you too will be able to get that outcome. And I tell people, modeling is the fastest way to compress decades into days. And it's right now, and it's even easier now because you have the internet. You're online. You can go online and see how people do things and interact with people through social media and email and different ways where you could never do it before. Before, you'd have to give them a call or write them a letter, and it'd be very touch and go if you get a hold of them. Now you can go online and connect with somebody on Facebook within 30 seconds and build a relationship and ask them the questions you need to ask to be able to model what they did so you too can get that outcome, compressing the decades of their learning down to your days of execution.
But is it really easy, Dave? It was that easy. Can't anyone model anyone?
So I don't know if it's easy, but it's simple. And, you're not going to get 100% response. It's just the way of life. The best batter in baseball hits 300, 3 out of 10 hits. Out of every 10 attempts, he gets 3 hits. That means you're failing 70% of the time. But you put enough out there, you'll get the response. So I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's simple. It's a simple strategy to use. And right now, if I needed, and Tony taught us this, and it was a great lesson for me, is if you needed to get to somebody within 6 calls, how can you do it? And all of a sudden you start thinking of all the ways you can network people and know the people you know and find people who could get to somebody that helps you to get to a better place. And I play that game in my mind all the time, is if I need to get to someplace, what 2 or 3 pieces do I need to call or get in touch with to be able to do that? Like I said, right now it's a lot easier than it was because you can go online right now, go on LinkedIn, connect with somebody, ask them, I know you work for this company. Is there any way you can put me in contact with somebody? Well, I can't, but I give you somebody else. And all of a sudden, 2 or 3 times later, you're with somebody who can actually help you get to your outcome. It's so much easier now than it was when I first started in business.
What is the most valuable thing you have ever given away?
I would probably say my time. I give my time to the American Red Cross and help them raise money for those who are in a situation where they need help. And I think, the most valuable thing we own right now is our time. Money can be replaced, and I've lost a lot of money, and I've given a lot of money away, and I've lost a lot of it. But you can never get your time back. Once this day's over, it's over. I'm never getting it back. So I would say the most valuable thing I give to people is my time. So right now, we're spending time together. This is a valuable time for me and for you together to hopefully share a message that somebody else can hopefully take this time and add value to somebody else's life.
Okay, let's talk about your book, Moments Matter. Tell us about the book.
Well, the way the book came about was I'll tell you where it started. I had a neighbor, 2 neighbors down the street, and they were 2 elderly ladies who lived together, and they would always call my family if they needed help, such as this. I remember the day because they called me and said, we need help with our TV. Can you help us with our TV? And they're 2 elderly ladies. You're going to help elderly ladies, right? They're your neighbors. You go do the right thing. So I went down and helped them with their TV, and one of the ladies said, do you want some cookies and milk? I said, of course. I love cookies and milk. And, what are you going to say no to cookies and milk? So as I was sitting there waiting for the cookies and milk, I was looking at a book they had on their table, and I started flipping through it, and it was pictures of concentration camps in Germany during World War II. And I was fascinated. I love history. I love looking at it. So where are these from? Who are these people? And she said, that's us. And they came up and they showed me their forearms, and they showed me the numbers on their inside of their arms of their numbers in the concentration camp. And I said to them, I said, you got to let me record your story. I mean, this is a story that needs to be told. And they said, no, we don't tell our story. No, we're not going to tell it. So how that came around with Moments Matters, I was with my former assistant, Vicky, and she called me one day and said, listen, you need to, if nothing else, record what happened that day in detail, not for your kids, because they know it is for their kids and your grandkids and their great-grandkids. So we got on the phone one day, over a day, about 8 to 9 hours, and recorded every minute of that day. That's what happened. And we knew we had a book, but we didn't know what to do with it. I had all these lessons and strategies and things that we did that day. And it was a great manual for all these things. How do you handle yourself during a traumatic experience? But what do you do with it? So I talked to my friend Cindy, who helped me write it eventually. And I said, you know what? One thing I realized out of this whole situation is that all these moments in my life that I did not mean anything when I was a kid in high school and college, all of a sudden, some of those things mattered that day. And I gave the example of when I was in Boy Scouts and I was left out in the middle of the wilderness to get an award, and you had to find your way back and do all these chores. And one of the things I had to do was, with my backpack on, swim across the river with my backpack to get to the other side so I could complete the task. And I said, I didn't think about anything of that, but all of a sudden, here I am in the river with my clothes on, swimming for my life. I said, maybe that one thing helped me that day have the confidence and to execute. I said, all of your moments matter, and that's how the book came about.
Okay, so where do we find this book?
Well, right now we're getting it on Amazon. Right now it's in softback. You can go to my website at DaveSandersonSpeaks.com, and I'll personally send it out. But right now we're in the process of getting it up on Amazon and making it an ebook before we get my next book out, which will be about post-traumatic growth syndrome.
And where can people find you to get in contact with you?
They can get the book and contact me at DaveSandersonSpeaks.com. It comes directly to me. I do not have an assistant now, so it doesn't filter through anybody. So that's the best way. Second way, patients, is on Facebook at Dave Sanderson Speaks. That's where I sort of give out some ideas of where I'm going to be and what's going on. LinkedIn is David Sanderson, and that's where I give my sort of these lessons that I share, and that's where I write my blogs. And then Twitter, of course, where I've told I had to be Twitter, is where it's Dave Sanderson too. So you go to any one of those 4 mediums, you can contact me. I make it very easy because I want to make sure people can touch me in the event they need help or they have questions on how they can grow from their potential traumatic life experience.
So, Clan, there will be more from Dave in a moment. If you are finding Dave's journey interesting and you are ready to hear more, come and listen to the full version of the interview at onlinesuccessjourney.com. If you are on Online Success Journey already, click on part 2 of Dave's journey and you'll get lots of tips to help you with your own life experience and businesses. And don't forget, you can access all other online success interview podcasts on the site as well. That's a wrap, Clan. Remember, success is a journey. Patience and Dave.
This is not the end of the journey. We hope you've enjoyed listening to part 1 and want to be sure you know there is a second part to this and every journey podcast at onlinesuccessjourney.com, filled with even more success tips, uplifting stories, and even a bit of fun. There are dozens of episodes only available to the members of the Online Success Journey clan. Check out the website and click on Join the Clan for more information. Patience would like to thank you for listening to this podcast, and she has a free audio gift for you at her website. Go to onlinesuccessjourney.com for instant access to this gift. Of course, you know that listening to the journeys of others helps each of us chart our own path. So make sure you're subscribed to be notified as each new interview is posted. There are so many ways to stay connected to the Online Success Journey and to listen in. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we appreciate your help in telling others. One of the best ways to share the benefit you get is to rate and review it at Stitcher and other sites by clicking the stars or completing the ratings form, by clicking thumbs up and leaving a comment on YouTube, or liking and sharing the podcast on social media. To review the podcast within iTunes, simply open iTunes to the podcast, click on Ratings and Reviews, then write a review. On behalf of Patience, and until next time, thanks once more for listening. It is our hope that this podcast will guide you on your own online success journey.